I was supposed to be in Israel tonight. For the past several months, I had been anticipating leading a trip there with 20 young San Francisco Bay Area couples through an organization called Honeymoon Israel. On October 7th, our plans changed. The trip was swiftly postponed indefinitely, leaving me and a busload of couples with a painful 2-week gap in our calendars. The last time I was in Israel was 2018. I spent the year living and studying in Jerusalem as part of my rabbinical school studies, and I lived in the neighborhood of Rechavia, whose main thoroughfare, by the way, was Rehov Aza, Gaza Street. It was very close, less than 5 minutes in either direction, from the residences of both the president and the prime minister. Most days that I walked by the prime minister's residence to get to school, there were protests of varying sizes. This is 2017 and 2018. Constituents would vocalize their concerns about the direction Bibi was leading the country, whether it was about social or economic policy, national security, or Bibi's ongoing criminal investigation. Reasonable Israelis seemed to share a distaste for the prime minister, who has now held the office for a total of over 16 years. In a New York Times video released in late October, survivors of the October 7th massacre were asked what they thought about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. One woman dryly replied, "Mize Netanyahu?" Who's Netanyahu? Israelis feel abandoned by a leader who puts his own interests above all else, even at a time of great need, and especially, it seems, at a time of great need. So where can we turn for glimpses of good Jewish leadership? In this week's Parsha, Chaye Sarah, which means the life of Sarah. The scene opens with Sarah's death, eulogized in the text. And Sarah lived to be 127 years old and died in Kiryat Arba, which is now and still is Hebron. The text tells us that once he was fit to stand up from Sarah's deathbed, Abraham sprung into action to secure a burial plot for her. What ensues is a real estate transaction that has religious and political significance to this day. In short, Abraham approaches Ephron the Hittite, bowing his head in reverence to ask for the sale of a cave, at the edge of the Hittite land known as the Machpelah, which is the cave believed to be the grave of our biblical forebears. But it was no ordinary real estate transaction. Ephron actually refused to sell it to Abraham at first. He refused because he actually offered it for free. He offered this choice burial site free of charge to Abraham, out of a sense, our commentators say, of deep camaraderie and care for the fact that Abraham was bereft. He was grieving his wife, searching for a place to give her eternal rest. The Torah portion this week speaks of Ephron's deep respect for Abraham. He has come from afar, downtrodden, but motivated to pay the ultimate respect to his wife Sarah, the act of burying her in the earth. What's important to note is that this land acquisition was made so that Abraham and his descendants could have a fitting place to die. So important was this to Abraham that he refused to take it for free despite Ephron's generous offer. And Abraham paid the large sum of 400 shekels for the cave to be rightfully and securely his. The war being waged against Hamas in Gaza right now is in its 35th day and is ostensibly about securing the right to life for Israelis and Palestinians in the land they inhabit. But before the land can get to that, it is serving as something else, a burial ground for far too many families. This ongoing struggle is not just about living in peace and dignity, it's about dying in peace and dignity, which according to Jewish tradition requires a ceremonial burial and ancient rites and rituals that bring comfort to the bereaved and dignity to the deceased. The Jews entered the land from elsewhere, wandering from place to place so that they could live and die honorably. The early 20th century Austrian Jewish writer Stefan Zweig wrote that the Jews have never known a true spring, flitting from land to land, generation to generation, before yet another uprooting and eventual flight. Throughout history, we were safe in different host countries, protected by the king's court or some other jurisdiction, until we were not. Sometimes this not was overnight, and other times it was more like a candle burning slowly from both ends. This is and has always been the Jewish problem. Zionism was supposed to solve the Jewish problem, Rabbi Danny Zemmel in Washington, D.C. shared in a sermon soon after October 7th. In those days, he recalls sitting in his car crying, repeating these words: Zionism was supposed to solve the Jewish problem. Every Jew from every angle has taken issue with how this should or shouldn't be implemented. From the binationalist to the ultranationalist to the fierce diasporist. The hope of Zionism, the tikvah of modern Israel, was and always will be securing a place, a country, a home for us Jews to be a free people with rights and consequences we merit by our own volition, including those burial plots, lots of burial plots. So when our hope is shattered, as it may be now, smashed by the Hamas and sympathizers, when that hope is shattered by those we thought were friends on our college campuses, in our shopping districts, in our Congress, we can't help but fear. And when our hope is shattered by Israelis who grossly misrepresent the thousands of years of Jewish history and memory, we also cannot help but fear. Chaim Yosef Yerushalmi, in his seminal work Zachor, which means remember, tells the story of Yudka, a usually quiet kibbutznik, someone who lives on a kibbutz, who piped up during a conversation about how to teach Jewish history to the Jewish youth of the kibbutz. I want to state, Yudka spoke with an effort in low, tense tones, that I am opposed to Jewish history. And then, when his stammering gives way to an articulate fury, I would simply forbid teaching our children Jewish history. Why the devil teach them about our ancestors' shame? I would just say to them, kids, from the day we were exiled from our land, we've been a people without a history. Class dismissed, go play ball. My teacher in Jerusalem, David Levine, calls this view lachrymose intolerance, the intolerance of any shedding of tears over Jewish history. In other words, don't cry over the past. Choose life, wipe away the tears, go forward. So we got to this point looking for safe places to live and die, to go about life with dignity that we enshrine with rights and protections. And we see once more that those things may be illusions. So how do we respond now? Do we put up or take down mezuzahs, menorahs? Do we call our elected officials? Do we march on Washington? Do we come to services? I love to cite a Mishnah from Pirkei Avot that teaches about the imperative to show honor to somebody from whom you learn one law, one chapter, one verse, or even one letter. And I also like to say Hebrew has 22 letters, 4 fewer than English's 26. Not that many, and there's life in every one of those letters. This moment won't be overcome by the fire hose of information and data coming from our phones and the news, nor will it be won once this bloody war finally comes to a close. We will survive because we go letter by letter back to our history, back through our memory of everywhere we've been up until this moment. We will survive this moment, as the Yiddish saying promises. Wir wählen sie überleben. We will survive the moment. We will outlive this moment, because we know from our deaths that every life is worth saving. We'll outlive this moment because our eternal hope is for shalom, a wholeness experienced only through love. We'll outlive this moment because Abraham picked himself up from beside his beloved Sarah's deathbed and communed with his compassionate, understanding neighbors to do the highest mitzvah, that of burying his dead. In outliving this moment, we teach our children our history and we enable them to play ball. The title of the parsha isn't the death of Sarah, it's the life of Sarah, Chayei Sarah. Out of her death, out of all this death, comes so much life. It's what we choose, and it's what we must always choose. Shabbat Shalom.